Today we're going to tackle one of the oldest, biggest questions there is. What does it actually mean to live a good life? For thousands of years, we've been chasing an answer, and in this explainer, we're going to unpack what science actually has to say about it. So yeah, let's just dive right in with that huge question. What does it really mean to be happy? Is it a feeling, a state of being? Is it about success? This is really the core puzzle, right? And as you'll see, the answer, well, it's way more complex and a lot more interesting than you might think. I mean, for centuries, people have been debating this, and modern psychology has kind of boiled it all down to two major paths. You could think of it as the classic showdown, a life of pleasure versus a life of purpose. Okay, so the first path, scientists call it the hedonic view. And this idea goes way, way back to ancient Greek philosophers like Aristippus. His whole argument was that the goal of life is actually pretty simple. Just experience the maximum amount of pleasure. In this view, happiness is basically the sum of all your positive moments, feeling good, enjoying yourself, and avoiding things that feel bad. Okay, but how do you even measure that? It sounds so fuzzy, right? Well, researchers have a term for it, subjective well-being, or SWB for short. It's not just some vague feeling. They break it down into three really concrete parts. First up, you've got life satisfaction. That's like your overall report card on your life. Then there's the presence of positive mood. Basically, how often you feel things like joy or contentment. And finally, the absence of negative mood. Pretty straightforward, right? How little you feel sad or angry. Put those three together, and that's the scientific recipe for hedonic happiness. But wait, there's a whole other way to look at this. This is the eudaimonic view, and it comes straight from Aristotle. And Aristotle? He thought just chasing pleasure was, and I'm quoting here, a vulgar ideal. Ouch. For him, true happiness, or eudaimonia, wasn't about feeling good, it was about doing what is worth doing. It's all about fulfilling your potential, about becoming who you were truly meant to be. And this isn't just some dusty old philosophy either. It's a real model for psychological well-being. Psychologist Carol Reif identified 6 key pillars for this. Things like autonomy, that's being your own person. Personal growth, always learning, always developing. Self-acceptance, being cool with who you are. Having a life purpose, a real sense of direction. Mastery, that feeling of being competent and on top of things. And of course, having deep, positive relationships. You can see how this paints a much richer, much more textured picture of what it means to be well. All right, let's put these two head to head so we can really see the difference. On one side, you have the hedonic path. The goal is to maximize pleasure, and the focus is all on feeling good. On the other side, you've got the eudaimonic path. The goal here is to fulfill your potential, and the focus is on living fully. Two totally different roadmaps for a good life. So the big question is, which one actually works in the real world? Okay, so let's take these theories out of the textbook and into the real world. How do they stack up when we ask the questions we all wonder about? What about money? What about our relationships? What about the goals we're all chasing? Let's start with the big one, probably the number one question on everyone's mind. It's that age-old question. Can money really make you happy? Well, the research. It's not a simple yes or no. Okay, so if you look at the big picture, country by country, the data shows that people in richer nations do tend to be happier than those in poorer ones. And that makes sense, right? Wealth provides stability. But, and this is a huge but, once a country reaches a certain level of wealth, getting even richer doesn't really move the happiness needle. And when you look at it person by person inside a country, the link between how much money you have and how happy you are is actually surprisingly small. And here's what might be the most powerful finding of all in this area. It's not about having the money. It's about how much you want it. The research is crystal clear on this. People who put a huge value on getting rich, who make it a central goal in their life, they are consistently less happy and report lower well-being than people who prioritize other things. It's almost like the chase itself is the problem. So if money isn't the magic bullet, then what is? Well, here's something amazing. Both sides of this debate, the pleasure seekers and the purpose seekers, they completely agree on one thing: relationships. The research is just overwhelming on this point. The single strongest, most consistent predictor of a flourishing life is the quality of our social connections. Having those warm, trusting, supportive relationships, it's absolutely critical. Okay, what about goals? We're all striving for something, right? Well, it turns out that why you're chasing a goal matters a lot. When you're pursuing what they call autonomous goals, things you do because they're genuinely important to you, well, achieving them gives you a double whammy. You get happiness and you get this feeling of vitality. But when you're chasing pressured goals, the stuff you do because you feel like you have to or to get someone's approval, achieving them might give you a little spike of happiness, but it doesn't give you that deeper, more lasting sense of well-being. This idea is all wrapped up in something called the self-concordance model, and the key insight here is super powerful. Just checking a box and achieving a goal, it's not enough. For that win to actually boost your well-being, it has to line up with your inner values, with your true self. Basically, success without authenticity, it just doesn't lead to a genuinely good life. All right, let's shift gears a bit. What happens to our happiness as we get older? There's this common story we tell ourselves that aging is just this long, slow decline and our happiness must go down with it. Well, guess what? The research tells a very different and much more surprising story. Let's just put the question out there. Do we get less happy as we age? I mean, if you polled most people, they'd probably say, yeah, of course, but they'd be wrong. This is so counterintuitive that scientists actually call it the paradox of aging. Think about it. Despite all the physical challenges that can come with getting older, our overall sense of well-being doesn't go down. In fact, for a lot of people, it actually goes up. On average, older adults report being just as satisfied with their lives, sometimes even more satisfied, than younger folks. But what's really fascinating is that the recipe for that well-being seems to change over time. If we look back at those eudaimonic pillars, we see some really interesting shifts. That constant drive for personal growth, that tends to taper off a bit. But our sense of mastery, that feeling of being competent, of knowing how to handle life, that actually goes up. And that focus on deep, positive relationships, that stays rock solid and important our entire lives. Okay, so after all of that, where do we land? We've looked at these two different paths to happiness, we've tested them against real-world stuff like money and goals, and we've seen how it all changes as we age. Now we can start to put together a much more complete and honestly a much more useful idea of what it really means to be happy. And here's the key thing. This isn't a competition. It's not about choosing team pleasure or team purpose. The science is clear that these two paths are actually deeply connected. When you live a life full of meaning, you also tend to experience a lot of positive feelings along the way. They're related for sure, but they are not the same thing. And that right there is really the big takeaway from all this research. A truly good life, one with deep, lasting well-being, is about more than just feeling good from moment to moment. It's about weaving the two together. It's about finding that joy in the moment, yes, but also getting that deeper satisfaction that only comes from a life of purpose, authenticity, and genuine connection. So that leaves us with one last question, and this one's for you to think about. When you look at your own life, your goals, your relationships, what you prioritize every single day, what's it built for? Is it built for pleasure, for purpose, or are you finding a way to build it for both?